Hello and welcome to Incisive's video roundtable on the 5 requirements for successful in-store digital experiences, supported by InfoVista. I'm Giri Agarwal. I lead strategy for Incisive, and truly part of my role is to have the tremendous opportunity to speak with people smarter than myself on topics that I'm truly excited about that are changing retail. And I have with me a few guests today that I'll let them introduce themselves. Rebecca?
Sure. My name's Rebecca Fitz. I am the real estate manager for Warby Parker. I've also in the past worked for some major developers as well as created my own pop-up shops and consulting company.
Hi, I'm Shelley Cohan. I have been serving the retail industry for over 25 years in various functions, mostly around retail store operations. Currently, I have my own consulting business, and I am an assistant professor at the Fashion Institute of Technology in the Fashion Business Management program. I'm a self-proclaimed retail warrior, and I eat, drink, sleep retail. So I'm happy to be here.
Hi, I'm Ricardo Belmar. I head up global marketing for InfoVista. We are a technology solution provider for retailers. We focus on giving retailers the ability to control the user experience in the store by delivering a technology that allows you to really get a visibility and control over all the software applications that run in the store and how they interact with that user experience so that you can really get the experience level that you want in the store consistently every time for every person and every customer, every associate at every store.
Great, thanks everybody for joining. So I'll do a very quick introduction to the topic. Quite honestly, this is the 90-second version where we're going to double click on all of these issues. So if you find this interesting, please stay on and listen to the rest of the dialogue. What's happened truly in retail is this idea that consumers are beginning to mash up their online and offline experiences, whether that's by bringing the smart devices into the store, whether that's through augmented reality where they can introduce physical objects inside their own homes. And their expectations from their in-store experiences are being set by the richness and the interactivity of the digital experience. And accordingly, there's a lot data available around how retailers are driving heavy investments into the digital in-store experiences and quite often relying on the success of those initiatives for their future viability. However, doing this mashup of digital and physical for a lot of legacy brick and mortar retailers is kind of foreign muscle movement. It's just something that their teams are not used to, their culture isn't designed for. And a lot of times, therefore, just sticking technology in, just turning buy online, pick up in store on, or putting a connected mirror in the store is not enough. That does not equal success. And therefore, we found this topic to be extremely critical, extremely important to look at, and basis an analysis of what leading retailers have done, found 5 key requirements or imperatives for success, and that's what we're going to focus on today. Without further ado, let's dive in really to why this topic is important. I will leave a little bit of this information up to the store. Somebody just recently said to me, digital is the front door of the store. And I think that encapsulates quite a bit for me. So I'll kind of bring some of our experts in. Rebecca, how are you seeing the role of the store evolving and how digital and stores are kind of fusing together? Any comments around that?
Sure. So I think that there is a big push from stores to almost want to create what they've created online. And particularly, I'm at a digital brand or digital consumer first brand. So there's that. But then I think that there's also something that's really important about, the traditional store. And, a good example, I think, of where some retailers are getting it right and kind of, on the why. And it's an experiment I was kind of part of at one of the developers was putting in Deliv, which is delivery software, into the mall. And what it really turned out is that mall shoppers are excited to physically have packages and go and put them in their trunk and go home and try them on, and that they're really not so interested in technology. And I think what happened from that, and in many different ways, not just from that, stores then began to realize, where does buy online and pick up in store really make sense for us, and how can we use technology to really make our store more valuable. So if you're selling furniture, for example, that's probably something that you want to invest your time, energy, and money into, as opposed to maybe apparel.
Thanks, Rebecca. That's really insightful, especially when you really talk about, some of the real estate pieces that are important. I also think when you talk about the convergence of digital and physical, the consumer is so far ahead of where a lot of retailers are. And so retailers really need to catch up to that. And I will say in 2018, this is the first year where I've kind of changed how I kind of look at this digital being kind of the first, experience into retail. And, last year and years before was the PC, that was the, introduction into the store experience. And now it's really the mobile. So mobile has actually become like the first screen of the digital experience. So retailers really need to understand that the mobile plus the PC and then the store all have to interact interchangeably throughout a seamless experience.
Yeah, I think I'd have to agree with that. I think we're probably all saying a very similar thing, that what digital really means now to a retailer is being able to deliver the same quality of experience in and out of the store, right? It really is now, particularly with mobile, all about satisfying and meeting the customer's expectations wherever they are, at whatever time they want to interact and engage. If they happen to be in the store, that's great. If they're not in the store, they expect a similar experience. And quite frankly, I think, Shelley, to your point, where it used to be PC based and it was an online e-commerce driven digital experience, right? That now sets the bar, right? That sets the expectation that customers want the same kind of power that they gain online in engaging with the retail brand, even when they're in the store. And I think that's really what digital is all about now.
Well stated. And I think what better day, people will be watching this with a little bit of a delay. We're recording and we'll be publishing soon. But today happens to be, just this morning, Sears announced, finally, as sad as it is for the people that work there, I mentioned today, the death certificate may have been issued today, but Sears died a long time ago.
Yeah.
And that's sad, but illustrative of, this whole thing that we're talking about. So this investment in omnichannel, if you think about, Forrester Research rated Sears in 2015 as one of their, one of the leading omnichannel players. So there was a lot of investment that Sears drove from a technology perspective. People talk about a 300+ person team of, really talented folks that have led the Sears chart, but somehow it just didn't translate into something meaningful without associated investments in store design, store layout, in the labor force, in really any intent to make those investments stick. So the point being made here really is sticking a bunch of technology or large bits of investments or acquiring capabilities that are even recognized by the industry may not actually mean anything. And therefore we need to investigate what those requirements of success are. So I'll go down. I don't know if there's anything, either from Sears or any other stories that, you'd like to comment on, Rebecca.
Not on Sears, but there is another interesting equate that goes back to the mobile, which really is, going to a doctor's office. Now there's so much information online that people are self-diagnosing themselves before they even get there. And I'm sure it's very, not an easy job for doctors, but that the same thing is really going on in retail. You're on your phone, you see what you want and you like it, and you're heading into the store. And then again, if the equivalent of your doctor can't deliver on it, then there's an issue.
Yeah, I think there's a couple challenges for retailers. One is, of course, what you had said earlier, which is you can't just throw technology in a store to throw technology in a store. It's a tremendous waste of resources, money, resources, and time. But also retailers are very challenged with, if you go to the NRF Big Show in January every year, NRF has the Big Show, just walking into the Javits Center, I can see retailers being completely overwhelmed with the amount of enabling technologies that they are faced with, deploying in their stores. So I think one strategy that retailers really have to look at is being very measured with the enabling technologies that create this digital experience with the overriding strategy of the company. There has to be an alignment. So it's what I call clarity of vision.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it does kind of speak to this idea of not forgetting about fundamentals, right? So you can pursue that great shiny new technology that feels like the right thing to put into the store to build a new experience and get more sales from that. But you can't lose sight of the fundamentals, whether those are fundamentals in a core underlying technology that supports the new technology, or just basic product and merchandising fundamentals that arguably you could say, right, Sears lost its way a long time ago. As Gary said, right, this may have been the day of the death certificate gets signed, but it's been in that downward spiral for some time, despite a lot of recognizable investments, whether in new technology and other things. But it seems to have always been missing a key fundamental component that was needed to enable the success of those new omni-channel capabilities, and it just never quite came together for them.
Yeah, and what's also very interesting, if you kind of look at least the brands that are up here, on this particular chart, it doesn't always need to be all bad news. So if you look at something like Walmart, they've been utilizing this idea of test and learn, fail fast, fail cheap. They've been, focused on saying, okay, we started this scan and go, we put it out in the stores, we learned from it very quickly, and we're going to abandon that approach and, pivot in another direction. It does not work for our shoppers. Walmart, in my mind, is a digital leader today. Yet for them, even with that leadership status, it is critical to have a framework to be able to introduce new digital experiences in the store and be able to be following through on that process and make sure that they're taking that through to completion rather than abandoning them with just a bunch of technology and some training manuals. So I just wanted to make sure that we understood where all the areas that we looked at while coming up with this framework of the 5 key requirements. And I wanted to spend the rest of our time here today talking through what those 5 key imperatives are for retailers as they look at in-store digital initiatives. So the first one is this idea of being clear on why. I think Shelley basically alluded to this a little bit when she mentioned, the reason, the clarity of vision, the reason for existence. I think at a retailer level, that's one thing, but also what's happening is how retailers use their brick and mortar stores as part of their overall retail strategy is evolving. And they're changing from these standalone profit and loss centers, glorified stock rooms where people come to buy stuff, to having a much more multifunctional, richer contribution to their overall business model. So I just wanted to kind of go around the horn and get your perspectives. Rebecca specifically, speaking to the Warby Parker experience, I would probably slot them here as, maybe perhaps the showrooms and service hubs. But if you could speak to both, what you're seeing at Warby and perhaps some of your other experiences as to the evolving role of the store, I think that'd be useful for us.
Sure. I mean, I think there's a lot of discussion about, certainly in the showrooming, that stores don't have to sell anything anymore. And that, Warby certainly built their model on the home try-on, which folks still do. And that the store is something that, certainly is also a sales floor, but that really helps the home try-on program and just really boosts it so that you have more support there for that. And then also convenience. Maybe you're not a home try-on person. So there's certainly that component. And obviously there have been a lot of brands that have continued to follow that. Bonobos certainly has done a great job. And I'd also say there's this component where I think there's still lots of business to be done. And there's been a lot of back and forth about whether they're here to stay. But a lot of big brands and a lot of CPG brands doing pop-ups and really, you're not buying anything when you go in, you're going in to experience them. And so they've really pivoted to have a great experience with us. Hopefully it makes you, go out and want to buy it. But a few of them have really just been purely the experience. Others, certainly you're able to kind of create something while you're there and you do actually have a transaction.
I think the other piece is, I know I already kind of talked about the clarity of vision, but I think one thing that a lot of retailers really need to kind of look within themselves is having the proper hierarchy in place that allows them to have this clarity of vision. So traditional retailers have always been, very hierarchical, and they have lots of levels and silos of people really going after, the e-com business, the mobile business, the social media, and it's always been run by different functions. And other companies like Warby Parker, who is like the gold standard, has really put together a comprehensive, digital strategy that seems to be, at least from an outsider looking in, it's very much about everyone being, on the same page and have one grand, vision of clarity.
Yeah, I think one thing I'd add to that is, I think when we look at which brands are being very successful and demonstrating that they're very clear on the why, it also permeates the culture within the brand, right? It's almost, there's a strategy, but you can also tell that it's almost, said another way, right? They've broken down those silos that you were mentioning, Shelley, right? They don't have this distinction between all those different areas anymore, and it flows through the entire culture so that everyone is clear on why and has that clarity, knows what the brand represents. And I think that then flows through to what the customers see of the brand, and customers are looking for that today.
You're all well stated again, and I think the point we're all trying to make really is from an in-store digital experience investment, being clear on why, being clear on the role of your store will actually drive what experiences you prioritize, what experiences do you invest in, and how you judge them. Because continuing to judge the success or failure of your in-store digital experiences through a more traditional lens of valuing your stores, you may either get some false positives, or you may, get certain investments that really aren't moving the needle for your business. So critically important. So the second imperative being this idea of, surprise, surprise, focusing on your shoppers. But it's amazing how many times you find retailers chasing competitive parity, falling into the Me Too trap, and losing sight a little bit of, what does my shopper truly desire? What will really make an impact to who my shopper is? A great example that I share here is around what we noticed between the chase for digital supremacy between Starbucks and McDonald's, and a lot of people would compare them, and you could draw up an assessment of who was doing better from a digital perspective, and McDonald's and Starbucks was racing ahead with its mobile order ahead, while McDonald's seemed to be lagging behind. That sort of analysis, while all great, it kind of seems to miss the point that Starbucks is a owned and operated, fully licensed operation, has relatively close to zero franchisees. McDonald's, highly franchised operation. By the way, McDonald's 75% of the revenue comes from drive-through. Their definition of digital, who their shopper is, what their shopper is doing with them, it's very different from what a Starbucks is. In a certain sense, you shouldn't and can't compare, those two businesses. I'm glad that they did not chase each other in terms of trying to copy what Starbucks was doing. McDonald's has defined its own digital strategy and is doing some amazing stuff that we'll speak to further down in the conversation. But I wanted to go around again and see if you find retailers truly clear, not only on their purpose of being, but also who their shopper is and focusing on what their shopper desires and how that translates into their in-store experiences.
Sure. I certainly think, and I don't want to be too rah-rah all these direct-to-consumer brands, but they don't have to, contend with some of the same issues. And I think it might allow them to focus more on, who their key shopper is and what they, want to do for them. I've talked about this before, but, Outdoor Voices, certainly it's this, I want to say, but I might be getting their demographic wrong, a little bit of a younger crowd. It's really about the experience of both buying their product, which is, kind of a basic but cool, affordable, and that they can also then be involved in these activities that they feel that are really important. So you can go on a group run out of the store. You can go there and just stretch out. It's really, that's a huge component of who their community is, and they want to feed that, and they're focused on it. They're opening a door on Fifth Avenue, and I don't think it will be any different than their store on Lafayette, that they are going to want to, support that community who's their consumer.
Yeah, I think that when you're looking at the retail landscape and you're looking kind of at what retailers, I mean, every retailer is going to have a different segment of the business. The shopper imperatives absolutely vary by retail segment. It varies by the target market. But also when you look at kind of the digital experience and you look at the enabling technologies, the key point that retailers really have to step back away from is to really understand at what point in the shopper journey is my customer going to be utilizing this, experience or enabling technology, because that's very important when you're building out, what it is they're going to do. So understanding at what point in the shopper journey that customer is going to experience it is very important. I also think you have to be super clear on the measurable objective that you want to obtain. So for example, just saying, okay, through this initiative, which we think is relative to our customer, we're going to drive profit. Well, you kind of have to slice it down even more. We're going to drive profit how? Through loyalty? Yes, and if it's through loyalty, then what specifically? Are we going to increase shopper frequency with this? Are we going to increase, more full regular price spend? Are we going to be, using other aspects? So you really have to detail out and connect it back to that overriding strategy.
I think this, again, goes back to the idea that you can't lose focus of some fundamentals in all retail segments, right? More than ever before now, right? The customer has to be at the center of everything. The shopper imperatives are critical. Part of each brand's responsibility is to identify, where do they fit? Not every shopper imperative is going to make sense for every brand, and it will vary by their segment, by their product mix, by their culture, right? By what they represent themselves as to the customer. And it's easy to be overwhelmed in some cases or distracted, right? By other interesting technologies of the day that seem trendy, that seem like it might get some customers' attentions, and lose sight of what you're really trying to fulfill in that experience for a customer. And you can't lose sight of that, right? That's a key fundamental, is that to keep the customer at the center of everything that you're doing. I mean, certainly I think everyone would accept Amazon has mastered that technique, right? They've mastered the ability to keep the customer at the center. But then along with that is also, I think, a recognition, and this maybe crosses between this point and the previous one. And Gary, you mentioned Walmart before. You have to have a willingness to experiment and willingness to fail, right? So I think a good example here is when you mentioned that Walmart tried the scan and go. They found that it wasn't resonating with their customers, so they decided to take that back. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. Just because you create a potentially new digital focused experience doesn't automatically mean it's always going to be successful. It's okay if it doesn't work, but you have to recognize that it doesn't fit with your shoppers and that you might have to come up with something else and move on to the next type of experience that suits your customer.
And it's amazing that when an organization has the ethos to be focused so sharply on the consumer, that you'll actually see it fall on both sides. So continuing with the Walmart example, when it does work, you look at what they're doing with their automated pickup towers that they really designed for buy online, pick up in store, listen to what the consumer was going, what the experience was. To Shelley's point, focused on the customer journey, and in fact found out that the greater friction existed in online order return. And they're now able to use those empty cubbies of the pickup towers to address a friction point in another part of the customer journey. And suddenly by doing that, they're unlocking value both for shoppers and for the enterprise. And that's kind of the whole, that underscores the point being made here is around being focused on the shopper, focused on the shopper journey, focused on eliminating friction from those journeys that matter to your shoppers most. So with the third imperative, we focus on operational readiness. And operational readiness can be defined really as a mashup of people, process, and systems. We would focus a little bit more on the process aspect of change management from an operational readiness standpoint. What we're finding is really this aspect of inadequate change management, putting initiatives in the store, not truly necessarily either understanding or allocating enough resources and budget as part of a initiative rollout to what it means for the processes at the store level, what it means for people, what it means for training and all that, those sorts of aspects. To the new capabilities, a lot of buy online, pick up in store, the first round of these as they were rolled out, or the ship from store initiatives, we saw retailers doing this without having accurate in-store inventory, and which led to high, mid 30, lower 40% order inaccuracy rates when they had a item that was in an order that included an item that was being shipped from the store. So imagine the cost that is incurred for some of these initiatives to be turned down without the associated capabilities that actually enable them. And then even things such as redesigning your store experiences, redesigning your store for these digital experiences. We're seeing digital upstarts, and so that Rebecca's not the only one holding the flag for the direct-to-consumer brand. I'll throw one out with MGME, this Boston-based footwear retailer that's doing direct-to-consumer, custom-crafted Italian footwear, and they're focusing on fit. They're saying footwear as a category has such a high return percentage, for online, that if we can figure fit right, and then we can, make this so much more of a valuable play in the footwear category. And they're using their stores as these, inventory-less showrooms. But again, they're using stores where people can come in and get a better sense of their fit. Once they're in their system, they can get merchandise much more frequently through refreshed designs and what have you. So again, wanted to go around the horn, and we see operational readiness as really being probably the central pillar on which any of these strategies are based, because you can figure out, what the role of your store is and who your shopper is. But when you're not operationally ready, you're bound to fail.
Well, one that comes to mind that I think as consumers we all feel quite a bit is if you're standing in line at a store, particularly a long line, it seems egregious. And I think something that retailers, and I'll talk about a legacy retailer that did a great job and was a little bit of a leader in it, was Coach/Tapestry, began to take out their checkout counters and began to go all via the iPad. And I'm sure that there was both a lot of internal sell-in in taking away the cash wrap, and also external sell-in to customers who were used to just walking up to one. But what it allows is certainly, for a better customer experience. I think a little bit of a more technology-focused experience for that Coach/Tapestry, customer. But on the back end, obviously, that was probably no easy feat, both infrastructure, operationally, and technologically.
Yeah, I think that when we look at, I like the word redesign, because I think it's really important to delineate the difference between, having a shopping journey, looking at it, and then adding in technology along the way to make the journey easier, versus stepping back and saying, well, wait a minute, let's start with the journey and think about the digital experience that's going to help us make this journey, more relevant for a customer. And it's almost like taking design thinking for retail, design thinking, starting with the customer and then building it out. So Giri, I'll go back to your shoe example. Adding in something to an existing journey would be, okay, we have a lot of shoe returns. Let's make it easier for customers to return shoes. No, we don't want to do that. What we want to do is go back to the customer and say, well, why are they returning? Let's figure out how to get less returns, not how to accommodate more returns from a process standpoint. So really looking at this from a design thinking standpoint, I think is very important.
Yeah, I think, this really is that linchpin to all, because you can put so many things into this operational readiness category, and it really does force you to look behind the scenes and look deeper, both into the organization, the processes, the store itself. What are all the different back-end systems that are supporting everything that you're trying to do? Even if you walk through, and take Shelley's example of a return, right? You walk through the process of everything that's touched along the way, and then ask yourself, how can I improve that, right? If I'm inserting if I'm doing something like a Walmart tower, right? Inserting some sort of automated return capability, what are all the different systems that have to be touched in this process now that's no longer going to be associate-led, perhaps, but is going to be self-driven, right, by a customer, you really need to have an understanding not just of what are the front end pieces, but what are the back end pieces that support that? What are the infrastructure pieces that are touched by this new process you're trying to introduce? And make sure that you've evaluated the readiness of each of those components before you go through and actually implement the front end piece, so you don't have any surprises. Obviously, the last thing any retailer is going to want is to put that new experience in, and works great during a test phase or a POC at one or two stores. But then as more customers come through, you realize that maybe you missed something that was required to scale that experience out. And that, therefore, you weren't as ready as you thought you were because someone forgot to evaluate a back-end process along the way. So I think it really does speak to having the right detailed lens to look through internally all the different systems and processes that are required for each new experience.
Completely agree. So to recap, this operational readiness could be a broader bucket, but has to be looked at through the lens of procedural, process, and cultural readiness. And it has to really be a matter of detail, looking at where this experience fits in and what are the depth of, the devil in the detail. What is the detail that's needed to be able to execute on the customer promise at scale? Extremely important, but often ignored. I'd say a lot of retailers do pay lip service to the idea of empowering the workforce, but these are the same people that then ask their store staff to defer their bio breaks or their bathroom breaks. So just culturally, I find it extremely interesting that there's this idea that we will somehow expect Cadillac performance from a Kia engine, but are unwilling or unable somehow to upgrade our investments in letting the people on our front lines be successful, because we're out there making the promise, and the frontline store associates and store managers need to deliver on that promise, and therefore the investments in tools, training, and incentives are critical to making sure that we don't have people on our front lines that are not truly empowered to keep up that promise. Just kind of curious if, I'll maybe even ask a direct question around, start your answers with whether, on a broad brush, have you seen, positive movement or enough positive movement on this aspect in retail over the last 2 years? And if not, if so, just some commentary on that. If not, what would you change? Rebecca, I'll go with you first.
I think I have seen some improvement. There's lots going on in this category with minimum wage going up, so from the government side of it, but also, really great concierge software, or, being able to use beacons and, buying into it so they know, when you're in the store, that you'd be interested in a sale. So I do think that there probably has been some movement here to the positive side. At the same time, I think that there's probably still a long way to go. On the technology component, I think it's great that, they want to equip sales associates with great technology. I do think, though, then you have to give, great training, and probably really just, value them more, both in training and probably in compensation, to get the kind of store experience that you want. And of course, it's so key to the experience in the store, and to, providing the best experience for your customer.
I wrote an article, it must be 3 or 4 years now, called The Knowledge Deficiency Gap, which is the amount of knowledge that sales associates lack versus the amount of knowledge that customers have coming into the stores. And 3 years ago, the gap was tremendous. So customers would come in knowing more about the product, the company, and everything than the associates. It's one of the biggest issues I've written about. What I have seen, Gary, is that has improved a bit. And I think a lot of retailers, I think the shortage of a workforce that is facing us now and moving into the next few years is a big piece of that. But also, I think when we think about workforce empowerment, there's kind of 2 levels. The first level is, empowering associates with tools that allow them to do their job better, from a digital perspective. So in other words, training, product training, tools that you can give to them digitally that make them better at what they do. The second piece is digital technologies or enabling technologies that allow associates to fully understand the technologies that customers are using. So I'll give you a great example. You know, I like Gregory's Coffee in New York City. It's a fun place to go. I was buying coffee one day. I had the app. I couldn't figure out how to get my $5 reward and pay for everything. And it was great. The associate said to me, first she asked, may I see your phone? Of course. And she's like, you just push this, this, and this. And in 2 seconds, she solved my problem. She knew exactly what I had on my phone and was able to solve my problem. It was a win-win because I felt a relief. Whew. You know, she helped me out, and it really drove home that, you know, associates that are empowered with the technology really can make a difference in that interaction with the customer.
Yeah, I think there's been a definite trend in improvement in recent years in this, but I think I agree with what sounds like we're all saying, that there's still room for improvement and still more to go. You know, I think I can remember probably at least maybe the last 3 or more years, or every year it seems someone is going to declare that this is the year of the associate, where every retailer is going to invest in more training and more tools and more technology, and then everyone kind of stands by to see it happen, and maybe 1 or 2 brands do, but it's getting better for sure. I think, you know, it's interesting. This is something I just talked about this a couple of weeks ago at another event, where you know, there's a retailer we worked with in the UK, that Dixon's Car Phone, that you know, if you're familiar with them, they're like a mobile device retailer in the UK, and they recognized this a few years ago and thought that, you know, one of the things they should do is equip their associates with some new technology. They wanted to give them tablets and give them some new software to help lead a customer through a purchase decision, which sounds like a fantastic idea, right? But of course, the one piece they forgot initially is that they kind of took for granted the idea that if I hand an associate an iPad or any other kind of tablet, they should already kind of know how to use that, because doesn't everyone know how to use an iPad these days? How hard can it be? But that lack of training was a problem. And then the other piece they forgot is that when you just give someone a mobile device to use, and even though you're in a store selling mobile devices, you have to actually worry about the wireless connection for that mobile device and how consistent and reliable it is. So that was another piece they initially, in some locations, had some issues with. And of course, what happens then, right? You have backlash from associates who feel like they've just been given a tool, but they haven't been given the ability to really leverage the tool. So it just increases the frustration for them instead of actually increasing their ability to serve a customer. So the net result was they had associates putting the iPads back behind the counter and not using them. Ultimately, right, corporate decided, you know, they wanted associates to use this. They had done a lot of testing that said customers leave the store feeling much more satisfied with less buyer's remorse if they had followed the process from the app that was on this tablet. So they really wanted to fix all of these problems so that the associates could use it. And they had a target. You know, they wanted to see a significant, you know, something on the order of 40% increase in conversion going into the holiday shopping season, the year they deployed this. So this is one of the things where, you know, that underlying infrastructure comes in. I mentioned earlier on how you really have to watch out for not just the new tool you want to give the associate, but what are the other back-end pieces that support that tool and enables success for the associate so they can use the new tool. And once those problems get resolved and are fixed, what happened for Dixon's, of course, all the associates loved the app. They were able to service more customers. Customers left feeling better about their purchase. And sure enough, when they looked back at the numbers after that holiday season, they hit the 40% increase they wanted in sales just from having deployed this new app for the associate that made them better equipped to serve customers.
Yeah, I think, Ricardo, you lay out a pretty compelling, you know, use case, a business case for Dixon's Car Phone to have kind of gone through that transformation. We also conducted some research looking at over about 125 retailers and brands globally, and we found the opportunity for retailers, brands to enable their frontline workforce to be in the order of about a 10% jump in both revenue and profit. That's about $110 million annually for about $1 billion retailer with an assumed, you know, 10% profitability. So I think I'm happy to note that, you know, the three of you are much more positive on the improvement in retail as an industry, on focusing on its workforce, its frontline workforce. I'd agree. I mean, I'd say, yeah, I'm willing to lower my, you know, judgment from saying, hey, this is never going to happen to say, okay, great, they're at least focusing on it. But if you look at, people like Apt Electronics, 90-year-old retailer, that has forever focused on its associates. To Shelley's point previously about arming sales associates with, reducing that knowledge deficiency gap, they do some pretty simple stuff. They're an electronics retailer, single store out of Glenview, Illinois. And if you go to the store floor, their store associates have very basic but empowering information on if you're looking at a television, yes, I have all the product features and I have the customer reviews and I have the competitive price matching, but guess what else I have? I have, how many in stock do I have on the store floor? How many in the back order? When is it that this could be in the customer's home? What is the margin on this product? If I sell at what price? And how far am I from quota? So it's human behavior. It's saying, hey, if I sell this at X and I have the customer willing to buy today in here, where can I make a deal today? And if I close that, what will I get out of it? I mean, I see that as being immensely empowering. And this is a 80, 90-year-old retailer that's doing it. Costco is so well celebrated for their focus on the associate and higher wages and stock option programs and health benefits, paid earned leave. And we've somehow always defaulted to digital investments. You wouldn't look at an Apt or a Costco to call them a poster child of digital transformation, but you would look at them and say these are long-sustaining, high-functioning, high-performing retailers that have focused on their associates and gone beyond arming them with tools and techniques, but it's a cultural focus. And I find maybe that to be the stretch for a lot of other retailers. So I hope the retailers are now beginning to focus on the digital aspects of enabling their workforce, will also look at it as a cultural challenge and run with it. So we come to the fifth imperative, which is really about not just making the promise, but keeping it. This is about making sure that your in-store digital experiences work at scale no matter what. This really applies broader than this one example that we'll cite, but people say, hey, what's worse than no Wi-Fi? Everybody on the count of three. 1, 2, 3.
Bad
Wi-Fi, right? And the same applies to all of your customer experiences. It's better to not make the promise than to raise expectations with the promise of a buy online, pick up in store, or a connected fitting room or a interactive display, than to make the promise and then fail at delivering it. That's somehow worse, at least in my book. So we'll go around the horn. Rebecca, your thoughts on how retailers can make sure that they deliver on these experiences consistently.
Well, and I think it's something we've already talked about a little bit, and it's not necessarily so tech focused, but I do think, getting, if the culture is on board on, committing to whatever the change is and putting the resources behind it, then I think that you really can make the promise and keep the promise. And so I do think some of the, the downfalls in delivery come from not actually having, taking a team and making it very small and kind of putting off by its side, and that it's special projects, as opposed to having it integrated within the company and having leadership really support it and deliver on it. So I think there's a structural, issue almost to, the hierarchy question on being able to deliver some of these processes.
I think that one of the most essential pieces for consistency and delivering consistency, if you think about it, every day, across all hours, across all locations, across, a global brand, if you're a global brand, I mean, that's a challenge, even with service standards. But I think one of the best ways that retailers can kind of do that is through this two-way communication with the customer. See, today's customer is the chief merchandising officer. They're the CMO, they're the CFO. They want to, help you run your business. And so by engaging them in two-way conversation, getting the feedback, and then acting upon the feedback, so hearing from them what's working, what's not working, and making changes and improvements quickly, nimbly, you have a better success rate of being, consistent if you keep the customer in the loop of that conversation.
Yeah, this is really where the execution is everything, right? Where if you don't have that consistency, it only takes one bad experience to propagate it through social media to everyone's friends and their friends and their friends, and you've lost all the value of that experience you were trying to build for the store. And this is where, when I mentioned earlier that there's that need to really go in detail to understand all of the back-end systems, processes, and other components that might interact with something that's only slightly related to the new experience, but because there's an interaction, you don't know what the overall execution is going to be. So for example, Gary, you mentioned bad Wi-Fi, but even if we put it aside for the minute whether it's good versus bad in a given store, if you're offering guest Wi-Fi to customers, then you have to have an idea, well, how heavily is that being used by customers? Because if you have customers using a lot of guest Wi-Fi, is that going to interfere with that great new digital mirror that experience that you put into the store? Is that going to make the image quality on the digital mirror suffer because you have 5 customers watching a product video or connecting to something else on YouTube over that guest Wi-Fi? So what does that mean? It means that you have to have some kind of additional technology in place to really act as that police cop, if you will, in between all of these different interactions so that one system doesn't interfere with another. It's no different really than saying I need to make sure that all my POS transactions are always able to go through at the top speed so that you don't add wait time to a customer's experience. A great example of that I can offer, in fact, is with McDonald's and their new ordering kiosks that I'm sure many of us have already seen. They're deploying these all over the world. We actually worked with them in some of their UK restaurants because some of their franchises there were experiencing issues with the payment processing on those kiosks, so that instead of delivering an experience that was supposed to be smoother and faster than going to the counter during lunchtime, they had customers getting a much worse experience where it was slower, payments were failing. Anecdotally, McDonald's told us they would see restaurants actually hanging a sign in their front door during lunchtime saying cash transactions only, because they were having these problems. So it just completely defeats the purpose, right, of having put that experience in your store in the first place. And this is one of those areas where it was through no fault of the ordering kiosk, no fault of the payment processor. It had everything to do with the network infrastructure into the restaurant that couldn't support the volume that they were now adding because they had so many more customers coming through now. Thanks to those kiosks, the transaction volume was going up and they hadn't prepared for that. They also had, at the same time, in some of these places, turned on guest Wi-Fi for customers. So what did that mean? It meant that now they had customers themselves competing for access to these valuable network resources with the payment transactions. So they needed something in place to help kind of act as a traffic cop between all of these software solutions and payment transactions to make sure that the transactions that needed to go through first always go through first. And without that kind of control or level of control within the environment, then they couldn't really guarantee the right user experience and the right performance level for each customer. And that's just so critical, right, to get the experience right. And that's, I think, the best example I can think of the lack of consistency and the problems that introduces versus delivering on the promise and bringing the consistency that you want for every customer at every restaurant or at every store.
Awesome. Thanks, Ricardo. So that kind of brings us to the end of our conversation here. To very briefly recap on behalf of all 4 of us, we spoke about the investments retailers are driving into in-store digital experiences as part of their strategy to engage shoppers that demand those sorts of richness in interaction and into invest in their own growth plans. These initiatives, however, are not just about putting or sticking technology in the store. They must focus on 5 key imperatives to succeed, redefining the value of the stores. What role does my store play, and therefore what initiatives, what experiences am I going to turn on? How am I going to judge them? Focusing on what matters most to shoppers and mapping out the shopper journey, identifying the points of friction and addressing those aggressively. Redesigning processes to be operationally ready to support these experiences, understanding at a level of detail what these experiences mean within the store environment. Empowering the workforce and ensuring that store teams are ready to support these initiatives through tools, training, and incentive. And finally, to be able to consistently execute these digital experiences at scale through the infusion of the right prioritized set of technologies that help retailers make sure that no matter what, the critical aspects of these experiences do not fail, and these experiences continue to create the outcomes that they desire versus a counterproductive effect of creating a failed customer experience promise. I wanted to thank everybody for joining us. Thanks to my panelists as well. Thanks, Rebecca, Shelley, Ricardo.